Unit 731. In the late 1930s, a massive complex in occupied Manchuria bore the bland name Unit 731. Officially, it was a water purification and disease prevention center for the Japanese Army. In reality, it was a factory of horrors. Inside its walls, captured Chinese civilians, and later Russian and Allied prisoners, became test subjects for some of the most grotesque experiments imaginable. The staff at Unit 731 even called these people Maruta, or logs, as if they were not human at all. One infamous experiment involved frostbite. Prisoners were forced to stand outside in the Manchurian winter, or to dunk their limbs into barrels of ice water until their flesh froze solid. Their frozen arms or legs would then be struck with a stick, making a sound like wood hitting wood, just to confirm they were completely frozen. Doctors next tried various methods to thaw the limbs, sometimes with hot water, sometimes with open flames, to study the damage. In other rooms, men and women were deliberately infected with deadly diseases such as plague, anthrax, and cholera. Without any anesthesia, surgeons cut them open alive to observe how the diseases ravaged their organs. Victims were fully conscious as their bodies were dissected. Some had limbs amputated and reattached in unnatural ways as a cruel experiment. Others were used as living targets to test weapons like grenades and flamethrowers. The horrors at Unit 731 seemed endless. Prisoners of all ages, including pregnant women and children, suffered unimaginable pain before inevitably dying. By the end of World War II, thousands of people had been killed in this facility. Perhaps most shocking, after the war, many of the doctors and officials behind Unit 731 were never punished. In exchange for their research data on biological warfare, they were granted immunity by the United States. The story of Unit 731 is a terrifying testament to how war can be used as a cover for scientists to abandon morality and commit atrocities in the name of progress. The Tuskegee Study. In 1932, in rural Alabama, hundreds of African American sharecroppers lined up at a small clinic. They had been promised free treatment for what was vaguely called bad blood, a term that could mean anything from anemia to syphilis. Trusting the doctors in their crisp white coats, these men believed they were finally going to get help for their ailments. They had no idea they were becoming unwitting subjects in one of the longest and most infamous medical experiments in U.S. history. For the researchers of the Tuskegee Study, these patients were never meant to be cured. Many of the men had syphilis, a disease that can cause organ damage, paralysis, and death if left untreated. By the mid-1940s, penicillin was known to cure syphilis, a fact the doctors kept to themselves. Instead of healing their patients, they gave them placebos and tonics, and simply watched the disease run its devastating course. Year after year, the men returned to the clinic thinking they were under care. In reality, the researchers were just taking notes as the men grew sicker. They even performed painful procedures like spinal taps, not to treat illness, but to observe it. As time passed, the cruel consequences became clear. Some of the men went blind or suffered mental breakdowns. Others were crippled by the disease. Many died from a sickness that a simple injection of penicillin could have cured. Their wives contracted syphilis, and children were born with the disease, all because treatment was intentionally withheld. And still, the study went on. It lasted 40 years, kept secret until 1972, when a whistleblower exposed it to the press. The public was horrified, and the experiment was finally shut down. The Tuskegee Study remains a chilling example of betrayed trust and racism in medical research, where doctors' cold pursuit of data outweighed basic human compassion. Nazi human experiments. In Nazi concentration camps during World War II, doctors turned prisoners into subjects of nightmarish experiments. On a freezing day at the Dachau camp, for example, a prisoner was placed in a tank of ice water while Nazi physicians observed. They watched to see how long it took for him to lose consciousness from hypothermia. This experiment was meant to simulate what German pilots might endure if they were shot down into the frigid sea. When the victim's body grew dangerously cold, the doctors tried to revive him with scalding baths, warm blankets, and even by pressing other prisoners against him for body heat. Many subjects did not survive, and freezing was only one of many cruel tests inflicted on human beings in the camps. At Auschwitz, Dr. Josef Mengele had a morbid fascination with twins. He selected pairs of twins, often children, from new arrivals, and subjected them to vile procedures. One twin might be injected with a mysterious substance or germ, while the other twin was kept as a control. Sometimes Mengele performed surgeries without anesthesia, even attempting to sew twins together. When one twin died, he would kill the other to compare their bodies. Elsewhere in the camps, prisoners were deliberately infected with diseases like typhus or had poison slipped into their meals to observe the effects. Some had limbs amputated or organs removed in brutal operations that served no purpose except to satisfy a twisted curiosity. By the end of the war, the Nazis had victimized thousands with these experiments. Most died, and the few survivors were left permanently scarred and traumatized. After the war, some of the doctors were put on trial at Nuremberg and executed for their crimes. The full revelation of these experiments shocked the world and led directly to new ethical standards in medicine, a pledge to never allow such atrocities to happen again. Project MKUltra. In the early 1950s, at the height of the Cold War, the CIA launched a secret program with a sinister goal: to control the human mind. Codenamed Project MKUltra, it funded experiments on unsuspecting people across the United States and beyond. In one instance, a group of men at a CIA retreat were secretly dosed with LSD in their cocktails. One of them, a scientist named Frank Olson, had a terrible reaction. He became increasingly anxious and disoriented. Days later, Olson fell to his death from a hotel window in New York. The CIA claimed it was a suicide, and the truth about his unwitting drugging only came out decades later. Frank Olson's story was just one part of MKUltra's dark legacy. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the CIA oversaw dozens of disturbing experiments under this program. Agents set up hidden safe-house apartments in cities like New York and San Francisco. There, CIA-paid prostitutes would bring men from local bars and secretly slip LSD into their drinks. Behind one-way mirrors, officers watched as these unsuspecting clients lost their grip on reality. In prisons and psychiatric hospitals, other experiments were underway. Doctors gave inmates and mental patients massive doses of hallucinogenic drugs, sometimes for weeks straight, to see if they could break a person's mind and control it. They combined drug-induced hallucinations with extreme techniques like prolonged isolation and electroshock therapy at high voltage. The idea was to wipe the mind clean or force confessions, all without consent. Most details of MKUltra will never be known because in 1973, the CIA destroyed many records. But what has come to light is horrifying. Countless victims were left psychologically scarred. Some never recovered. A few even died during or after the experiments. In 1975, Congress held hearings that exposed a glimpse of this program and shocked the public. Project MKUltra remains a chilling example of how a government agency crossed every ethical line, turning ordinary citizens into unwitting guinea pigs in a quest for mind control. The Stanford Prison Experiment. In August 1971, the quiet basement of Stanford University's psychology building was turned into a mock jail. Professor Philip Zimbardo recruited 24 male college students and randomly assigned them to be either prisoners or guards. On the first day, everyone understood it was just an experiment and behaved accordingly. But by the second day, the illusion started to feel disturbingly real. The students playing guards quickly began to wield their power. They dragged the prisoners out of bed in the middle of the night, shouting and banging on cell doors. They forced the prisoners to do push-ups and other menial exercises as punishment. One guard invented a rule that prisoners had to recite their ID numbers for hours on end. With each passing day, the abuse grew worse. Prisoners were taunted, deprived of sleep, and forced into degrading tasks. When one prisoner refused to obey, the guards threw him into a dark closet they called solitary confinement and had other prisoners shout insults at him. The defiant prisoner soon broke down sobbing. Another prisoner had a breakdown so severe that he had to be removed from the experiment early. By the fifth day, the mood in that basement was one of fear and oppression. The guards, ordinary students a week before, had become cruel and domineering. The prisoners were cowed and paranoid, as if they were in a real penitentiary. Zimbardo had planned for the experiment to run 2 weeks, but when a visiting colleague saw the abuse and objected, Zimbardo realized it had gone too far. He shut the experiment down after only 6 days. The Stanford Prison Experiment stands as a powerful example of how quickly normal people can slide into brutality when given unchecked power, a stark reminder of the fragility of our morality under extreme circumstances.